Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sommer. I'm an employment law and business law attorney, and I have this show every Tuesday night from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Talk Radio NYC, where I have guests that talk about and discuss the most engaging and novel issues of the day, issues that employers and business owners face with regard to employment, with regard to labor, with regard to business. And so in that spirit tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest, Dr. Marc Miller, president of Marc Miller Coaching and Consulting. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to have you as well. I'm sorry?
And Happy New Year.
Oh, thank you. Happy New Year to you too. And Happy New Year to all our listeners tonight out there watching or listening to Talk Radio NYC. We hope you're having a great start to 2022. And so, Marc, I just want to give our listeners a little bit of an introduction so they have a little more of your background. And so I'll just note that Dr. Marc Miller, Ph.D., PCC, is the president of Marc Miller Coaching and Consulting. He provides executive coaching to executives, professionals, and business owners and leaders. And he also consults with and provides coaching to organizational teams to help them to create organizational cultures characterized by improved employee engagement and team collaboration, as well as increasing talent retention and attraction, productivity, job satisfaction, and resulting in overall increased innovation and profitability for the organization. Marc engaged with individuals and with teams as a professional coach to promote the team's communication and collaboration by developing greater self-awareness and other emotional intelligence skills to promote ever-increasing levels of personal, professional, and organizational success. Informed by his professional training and experience as a psychologist, he differentiates himself from most other business coaches in bringing this wealth of knowledge and understanding to the work he does with his individual and organizational clients. Marc has a PhD in psychology from Adelphi University. He has earned a professional coaching certificate from the professional coaching program at the Zikin School of Business, Brewer College, CUNY, and iCoach New York. And as a professional coach, he holds the credential of Professional Certified Coach, that's the PCC that I mentioned, awarded by the International Coach Federation of ICF. Marc has completed the Foundations and Team Coaching Certificate from the, certification from the Global Team Coaching Institute, and has recently completed their practitioner certification in team coaching program. And lastly, Marc lives in Plainview, Long Island, New York. And that is like quite a mouthful. But Marc, once again, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Eric. And yes, that was a lot to read, and I probably could have condensed it a little bit, but thank you for reviewing my history that way.
Sure thing. Well, I thought it was a great, for our listeners, like to really hear some of your background, which we'll get into as well on the show. And so our topic for tonight, for those listening tonight to the show, we're going to be discussing emotionally intelligent employers, right? Leading with awareness. And what Marc and I were talking about for the show is the fact that many leaders and managers may have been taught early on in their careers that the workplace was no place for emotions or empathy. Others were trained decades ago in theories of management that involved strict accountability, a focus solely on productivity, and using fear as a tool to govern and manage their employees and workers. In recent years, what I've seen as an employment lawyer is that most management consultants and most HR professionals and employee relations experts alike have come to see the value in having a so-called softer approach, one that requires leaders to cultivate and use their own emotional intelligence and to address employee conflict and workplace challenges through an emotionally sound and psychologically aware lens. And the pandemic, with its stressful impact, I think we've all felt, on the mental health of employers and employees alike, perhaps makes an emotionally intelligent approach to managing your workers that much more crucial to a company's success. So that really is our topic this evening. In our discussion, Marc and I will talk about some more effective, healthier, and sound ways that leaders in business can use their emotional intellect to better motivate and manage their employees. So that's the topic that we agreed on. And I wanted to ask you, Marc, before delving right into the topic, I wondered if you can tell us a bit more about yourself. We got through your credentials and what you do now, but like, how did your career initially start out? And then what prompted you to become a coach or a consultant for professionals and businesses?
Okay, so
Mhm.
going way back, quite a few decades, when my hair was dark and
Mhm.
it isn't anymore, but I still have a head of hair, which thank God I'm happy about.
Thank-
Sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. Not everybody is blessed, but it's genetic. My dad is 96 years old and has better hair than I do.
Wow.
It's really amazing. Anyway, um, when I was 27 years old, I completed my doctoral dissertation in clinical psychology at Adelphi. Um, and that was pretty young. At that point, I actually had been procrastinating getting the dissertation done for a few years, and I had just my first child had just been born, and
Mhm.
and my wife at that time, not the same wife anymore. That's another
Mhm.
story.
Sure.
Said
Sure.
you better get your act together. You have to support a family now. Get your doctoral dissertation done so you could get a job. So
Mhm.
that kind of motivated me to do that, to finish it up. But I was trained as a kind of psychoanalytically oriented therapist in that
Mhm.
program, and um, and I practiced as a therapist primarily for quite a few years, a few decades, in fact. And the difference between therapy and coaching is one that can be a discussion that may be better off, you know, waiting for another time because it's kind of there are a lot of subtle differences. But I think the
Sure.
main approach to psychotherapy is people are when we went through the program at Adelphi, we were taught to call the people we worked with patients, and the model was a medical model. I think it's evolved since
Mhm.
then, and a lot of therapists call the people they work with clients rather than
Mhm.
patients. But there was very much an idea that the people we were helping and trained to help were people who were suffering from psychiatric disorders of one kind or another, and one severity or another.
Mhm.
And the goal was to not cure them because cure is kind of an elusive concept in psychotherapy, but to help them function better. And
Yes.
even then, many of the clients, I would call them clients now, who I worked with, were regular people, and
Mhm.
some had more severe problems, like, some serious depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders.
Mhm.
Generally, people who are in the psychotic realm are not really treated by psychotherapists as much as by medication management.
Sure.
But over the years, I worked with a lot of people as a psychotherapist, but really a lot of times I felt it wasn't curing them or helping them with dysfunction as much as helping them tap into their strengths and learn how to set goals for themselves and overcome whatever obstacles their childhood experiences or other experiences may have presented them with, and help them reach a point in their adult lives where they would live, with more personal satisfaction, success, and happiness.
Mhm.
At a certain point, I discovered something called coaching,
Mhm.
which wasn't around very much when I began. I don't know if it was around very much at all when I began my work as a psychotherapist, psychologist. But I liked the approach of coaching when I discovered it, probably sometime in the 80s or maybe in the 90s,
Mhm.
um, because the approach was focused on helping clients clarify what they want to work on, what's getting in the way of being happier or more successful, however they define that. And
Mhm.
that I was attracted to that. It kind of fit in more with the philosophy that I was using when I still called myself a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
I didn't like the medical model. I didn't like diagnosing people who really weren't suffering from mental disorders or psychiatric disorders. I didn't
Mhm.
like dealing with insurance companies. And at some point, I made a commitment. I'm going to become a coach. I'm going to take some coach training, which I did. Um, and I saw that there was a lot of overlap between the way I did psychotherapy and the way I do coaching.
Mhm.
But I like the positive approach. I like seeing people in terms of their strengths rather than their disabilities or weaknesses.
Mhm.
We all have obstacles, and learning how to face them and deal with them and overcome them to the best of our ability is kind of the philosophy that I use in the work I do. So I'm more comfortable thinking of myself as a coach. I don't deal with insurance companies anymore, which was liberating. And coaching is applicable both on a personal level. A lot of people call themselves or are trained as life coaches.
Sure.
Some people focus on the business aspect of coaching, working in organizations with executives and other people in managerial positions.
Mhm.
I'm very attracted to that area of work. And as you mentioned, when you were going through that list of things that I've been studying and doing,
Mhm.
I've recently gotten more and more involved in a team coaching approach, because the way I see what we do as human beings, and certainly in the workplace, is individuals are working collaboratively, or should be working collaboratively with other people. Individuals working in the workplace in a siloed kind of way are not as effective
Yep.
as those who work with members of the team. And
Mhm.
a lot of organizations have what they call teams, but they don't yet work in that cooperative, collaborative, and psychologically safe way that can really bring out the best in everybody, because
Mhm.
the total is greater than the sum of the parts.
Mhm.
When people are all rowing in the same direction, but each in their own individual, unique way,
Yeah.
organizations can be so much more successful, and people can be so much more gratified in what they do.
Mm.
So,
You know, yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, Mark. It's like I hear like a lot there that's worth, I think, noting, taking note of, for those listening tonight. Like first, I hear about just having a certain mindset back before you did coaching about how you saw the relationship with your clients, or those days patients, like about wanting to help them tap into their strengths, overcome obstacles, and how the medical model maybe had that same goal, but perhaps like was more about identifying pathologies, maybe perhaps, and then it's like you want to be focused on the solution. And what's also interesting to me is that when I have guests on the show, and maybe people out there tonight listening can relate to this, I meet people who are fellow attorneys who became teachers, professors, psychologists, like who became coaches such as yourself. What I find is that like people are attracted to a certain, say, outcome or goal, and they've just discovered that their skill sets can transfer over nicely. And so I have a couple of friends of mine who are by trade psychologists who are going into coaching. So it's interesting to hear that they have very similar, mindsets when I've seen. So it's really interesting to hear that, and talking about like the idea of collaboration and coaching can be used for business or life. I'm glad you mentioned that in your experience, the siloed person doesn't often do as well as when you're all rowing in the same direction in a team. And I think it's an interesting topic we might even circle back to on the show tonight, because with the pandemic and different waves with Delta, now Omicron, and all these different, a lot of companies, I think, are sort of becoming de facto siloed workers in their own homes. And there's a lot of debate I've seen around not just the, say the logistics or the monetary aspect, but how motivated do people really get, and how do they do well as a team when someone's working from their apartment in New York City, someone else like upstate New York, so it's really interesting. I think I just kind of, that came to mind when you said just about, about coaching people to row in the same direction and noting collaboration. So really good to, have that as part of our show tonight.
yes, I'd love to get back to that.
And it's funny how time flies when we're having fun, but believe it or not, I'm about a 30 seconds shy of our first commercial break. So rather than ask you a question I thought about the topic, maybe we just take a break a tad early. So if that works for you, Mark. And I just note that for those listening here at home tonight, you're listening to, or perhaps you're watching on video on Facebook, you're watching Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney. My guest tonight, executive business coach, and Dr. Marc Miller, coach and consultant from Marc Miller Coaching Consulting. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. Once again, I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, here every Tuesday night, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Talk Radio NYC. My guest tonight, Dr. Marc Miller, business executive coach, consultant. And our topic for this evening, in case you're joining us late, is emotionally intelligent employers leading with awareness. Now, Marc, that I thought about this, and the first thing that jumps out at me is that phrase, emotionally intelligent, emotional and intellect, right? EQ, if you will. So I'm wondering, how would you define emotional intelligence? And once you define it, how important is it for managing and leading employees in the workplace?
Okay. So emotional intelligence, I actually put some notes down because there are several components to it, and I didn't want to leave any of them out. There are actually primarily 5 aspects to it. The most important of which I believe is self-awareness. They all reflect on our ability to understand our own emotions and the emotions of other people and how that affects relationships and what we do together. Self-awareness is one component. Self-regulation or self-management. How do we deal with the emotions that we do have? How do we have control over them so they don't disrupt our functioning in an optimal kind of way? Motivation is usually seen as an aspect of emotional intelligence. What motivates us, what motivates other people, understanding that aspect of how we function as human beings.
Right.
Okay, and then the other side of the equation is social awareness, the other person. How aware are we of other people? And that encompasses the word empathy, which we hear all the time. And, it's not always clear to people what empathy means. I think most people do understand that it's kind of sensing or feeling what other people may be feeling.
Right.
Okay? It's different from compassion and sympathy in some subtle kinds of ways. But empathy is really important because we can't read other people's minds, but we can kind of pick up on what other people are feeling. And we do actually have a part of our brain called mirror neurons that actually respond to another person's emotions. But there are ways that we can clarify what another person is feeling by asking questions. So the goal isn't to be a mind reader, but part of being emotionally intelligent is being aware of yourself, but also being aware of what other people are experiencing and finding out as much as we can about what they're experiencing so we can adjust our responses to them.
Right.
And the final area is social skills, relationship management, which kind of is social awareness and empathy multiplied by how many people we're dealing with on an ongoing basis. So the importance of emotional intelligence is profound.
Yeah.
Daniel Goleman, who is the person who's most connected with popularizing the idea of emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
I think he wrote around 1990, maybe a little bit before that, and prior to that, it wasn't a topic that a lot of people knew about, but it
Mhm.
has mushroomed since then.
Yeah.
Uh, so the question always was, do you hire a person because of how smart they are intellectually, IQ,
Mhm.
or, and it's not necessarily an either or do you hire people because of their emotional intelligence, their
Mhm.
sensitivity to other people, their ability to communicate? All the things that I mentioned before have a lot of interpersonal components to it.
Sure.
And the bottom line is that you can have 180 IQ if it goes up
Right.
that high, it depends on the scale,
Hmm.
and be really not attuned to other people, and also not very attuned to your own emotions.
Right.
And in a workplace setting, you're going to not be very successful in leadership or management positions for sure. And even in staff, team, employee positions, understanding the social context that you're in is very, very important. Dealing with coworkers, dealing with clients and customers, it's all about how we understand other people
Mhm.
and how we react to other people. So that's the self-awareness part.
Right. I think that's like a really excellent definition. It has all those different components to it. Because like in order to say how important something is, we have to know what that thing is that we're talking about, right? Have the same common language. So, what jumped out at me, Mark, from what you said, definitely the self-awareness being kind of key, because without that, I feel like the other pieces, other aspects might not fall into place very well if you don't know your own emotions, understand yourself. But like as an employment law attorney, I see this with clients, not with business owners or employers, where the emotional regulation and the social awareness, social skills are so vital, and especially with comes to regulation. Like so many times I see, we're in an age, technology wise, where it's very easy people to say to like jump the gun, overreact, to be impulsive, reactionary, to act on a whim, to act out of temper. And an email can send a blast that could like include some very harassing, language, or someone can be fired, without like further thought. So it's like the idea of regulating our emotional responses, I think, has never been more crucial than in an age where people just like, here's a text and this is out there. And the social awareness, how people are feeling and respond, you really can't like, lead a team of employees if you can't sense what gets them fired up and happy, but also what gets them turned off and disillusioned. And it's funny when you mentioned like the importance of um, emotional IQ over intellectual IQ. And again, your point, it's not an either or. I think you're right, but like it's made me think of a funny situation, and maybe this may have clients in this realm, but like I once worked at a law firm many years ago. There was a guy there who was absolutely brilliant. He was just like, he knew everything. He was very analytical, and really super smart guy, but very poor social and skills and like emotional regulation. So he'd get on the phone to discuss the case and the settlement. I'd overhear him in his office, and he'd be telling the other attorney why they're wrong, how they don't understand the law, how they're clueless. And then invariably, like, often he would say hello, hello on the phone, and then he would turn to down the hall to the partner and say, "My phone's not working. It got disconnected mid-conversation." So I don't think he realized the person hung up on him, and it happened more than once, at least 3 times I recall, in some capacity. Where, so just like all that intellect, but without the emotional component, the self-awareness, the how am I coming across, very important. So I'm glad you brought up those aspects. I think hard to deny how important those are.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Part of the complexity of all this stuff
Uh-huh.
is how our brains work.
Right.
And frankly, when I was in graduate school a long time ago, we really didn't know a lot about how the brain worked. And it's really only in the last decade or two at the most that neuropsychologists have been studying the brain at a much more sophisticated level using fMRIs and other computer-based technologies. And there's a lot that we've learned. The most important of which I think is that the emotional reactivity part of our brain
Mhm.
operates so quickly, much more quickly than the rational part of our brain. And when we're triggered, when something gets to us on an emotional level, usually because there's some sense of threat, which
Mhm.
evolutionarily went back to the days when, I guess early human beings and actually primitive animals have the
Mhm.
same the part of the brain called the amygdala, part of the limbic system. It's very primitive, but it alerts the organism, whether it's humans or other primates or other mammals or even less evolved creatures, that there's a danger in the environment, and
Mhm.
it senses danger very, very quickly. We don't even know how quickly. I mean, it's been measured, but it's much more quickly than we human beings realize. So when we're triggered by an emotional situation, because now it isn't a saber-toothed tiger that's threatening us, it's a boss who's angry at us,
Right.
or it's another social situation, we can get triggered
Mhm.
so quickly that the part of our brain that usually exercises good judgment and rational thinking and stays calm under those situations actually shuts down. That the prefrontal lobe, which is the most sophisticated part
Yeah.
of our brain, does
Mhm.
not function when the amygdala gets fired. And
Mhm.
uh, there are neurochemicals that get released,
Mhm.
cortisol and other ones that get us into fight and flight mode, or
Right.
other more kind of human, sophisticated reaction patterns, but
Mhm.
they're not very adaptive. They can be very dysfunctional.
Right.
It's like yelling at somebody. When you get angry, they're not going to hear you when you're yelling at them.
Right.
But that's the anger comes out, and that's the way it gets manifested. Or you react by running away, by hiding, by avoiding.
Right.
Um, Understanding that, I think, is crucially important. Understanding how our brain works, and
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be at the level that a neuroscientist understands it, but just
Sure.
knowing what triggers you. What are
Right.
the factors in your environment, in your family environment? What gets you upset in your work environment? What gets you upset?
Mhm.
And you're going to react. And it's only
Mhm.
when you learn from experience to identify what is going on in you, what's getting emotionally triggered in you, that
Mhm.
gradually, if you work at it, you can learn how to gain more control and regulate your emotions better and your
Mm.
behavior better. But I think most people in the world, most people in real life, are not very
Mhm.
good at doing that, because it operates unconsciously. It operates, that reactivity operates so quickly.
Right.
We have patterns of reaction that
Mhm.
recently I've been learning about a system that defines them as saboteurs. We have parts of our
Mm.
psyche, patterns that repeat themselves, that create
Mhm.
more problems than they solve. And it's really
Right.
the process of learning about that that can really make a difference.
It's interesting, Mark, when you mentioned the amygdala, from what I've read and heard about the whole fight or flight situation, I think that kind of response, like how that can be was associated with, and everything I've heard, obviously not to the level you're familiar with this, but like the fact that like the mind is essentially shut down, the part around judgment, restraint, looking at facts and asking, are these facts real, or am I imagining this? Am I mishearing this? It's just that whole fight or flight mode. What I find interesting is that very often in the context of employment and employers, like one person's triggered and then their reactive, angry response could then trigger someone else's fight or flight. And that
Absolutely.
person starts to shout or yell.
Absolutely.
And it's a shouting
Absolutely.
match, right? So it's like a ping pong ball, a Super Bowl, like keeps bouncing around.
Right.
And
Well,
so
it escalates.
that's it,
The
right? Escalate.
interaction is an escalating one, where my anger triggers your anger, or or whatever your response is. And that interplay between human beings
Mhm.
just keeps going unless somebody has the ability to step back, decenter, be aware of what's going on, and calm the situation down. But they first have to become aware of it, calm themselves down to stop that vicious cycle. But you're
Right.
absolutely right, Eric. Once that gets going, things get totally out of control. Or the other person
Mhm.
just runs away, feels intimidated. In the
Mhm.
workplace, uh,
Mhm.
owners or bosses or managers have more power than staff in
Right.
general. And if they're in an angry mood, most people who work in those situations for an angry, belligerent boss,
Sure.
hate the boss, hate work, and more now than ever, but it's been
Right.
going on for a while, they're going to choose to leave that boss. Most people leave their job because their boss is intimidating and unempathic and unresponsive. And now people are leaving their jobs in droves because they just don't want to put up with that.
I think that's an excellent segue for after the commercial break. We'll come back. We'll talk about, you know, the how those emotional triggers in the workplace, it can be so damaging. How people, what are the consequences? People leaving, people getting fired, resigning. But first, we need to take a quick commercial break. So I'll just say, Mark, that was an excellent response there. Very interesting food for thought. You're listening to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, and I'm here tonight with Dr. Marc Miller. Stick around. We'll be talking about all this emotional intelligence and how to survive and really cultivate it during COVID. So we'll be right back.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney. I'm here tonight with Dr. Marc Miller. Dr. Miller is president of Marc Miller Coaching and Consulting, providing executive coaching to professionals, business owners, and leaders. And we're talking about this topic of emotionally intelligent employers, leading with awareness. And if those perhaps for recapping or joining us late or just want to recap what we discussed so far, I think Dr. Miller, Mark gave us a great breakdown of what the phrase emotional intelligence really means, talking about the empathy, the social awareness, self-awareness, like emotional regulation, why it's so important, like in the workplace, like when you have people, who if they just kind of yell or scream or overreact or react impulsively based on the amygdala fight or flight response, like they can't actually engage in rational, reasonable discourse. And without rational or reasonable discourse, nothing gets really accomplished, right? Problems don't get solved, issues don't get resolved. So I wanted to talk about this little thing that's been happening last almost 2 years, so COVID-19, that many of us unfortunately are quite familiar with. And wondering, like, how does, Mark, how does prolonged stress, like for example, like the stress, say of COVID-19, how might that impact our emotional intelligence, especially for leaders in the workplace?
Prolonged stress is a very negative factor in a lot of ways. I mean, it affects our physical and our emotional health. And if you think of, a little bit, we talked about the amygdala and how reactive we can be when there's a sense of stress, when it's ongoing, when it's chronic, when it's
Yeah.
persistent. That part of our brain is being activated all the time.
Mm.
You know, the neurochemicals that are coursing through our bodies are creating more and more tension and stress and reactivity. We're more likely, even in periods of, you know, I mean, it's not constant at a high level, but we're more likely to be reactive when there is an interpersonal problem that emerges. Usually when we're, you know, when people are at a kind of a baseline of calm, of, you know, being comfortable and safe, it takes longer to be reactive to interpersonal stressors. When you're in a chronically stressed condition, which is what's been happening during the pandemic,
Yes.
you're much more irritable, you're much more reactive. Your brain is going to react much more quickly in that fight or flight or variations on those themes kind of ways.
Mm.
So, you know, isolation has been difficult for a lot of people, for many people, for maybe perhaps most people. Being worried about getting sick is a tremendously stressful thing. And organizations that have had to work remotely, where people have had to work remotely, has created a lot of difficulties that working in the workplace really doesn't create in the same kind of way. People need other people. People generally, even people who are more quieter or introverted, are still people oriented. We are wired that way. We're social beings.
Yes.
And in the absence of connection and contact with other people, there's a tremendous sense of loneliness and anxiety and stress that a lot of people are experiencing. And, you know, we know that that's true. There's an uptick of depression and anxiety and alcohol and drug abuse and violence and a lot of things that are happening in general in our society. And as it impacts on the workplace, there are a lot of factors that have made it difficult for organizations to function optimally. Some companies have gradually come back to the workplace. Some have hybrid systems where some people work remotely, some people come in. You know, there are a lot of variations on that. But one of the big challenges is how do organizations continue to maintain a sense of purpose and meaning and connection to the organization, to the goals of the organization, to the sense of being part of a team. So motivation is impacted. I think a lot of people in management and ownership positions may not be, some are sensitive to that and are trying very hard to deal with it, but it's hard to know what the right answers are. And you know, I think this is a time that is trying and challenging for a lot of organizational leaders and for people who are working in organizations.
Yeah.
So how to solve that? There are no great answers. And one of the things I wanted to say before about being a coach, I don't see my role as a coach to provide answers. And some people can be frustrated by that. You know, and you as an attorney, you know, if somebody comes to you for for a consult on a legal matter, they expect you to give them an answer about what the law is or what the options are. Coaches avoid that if they're really well-trained coaches, but the opportunity is to explore options. And my job is to help whoever I'm working with, whether it's an executive or executive team, organizational leaders, owners, managers, or staff, to help people explore what's going on for them, what they're experiencing, how they're reacting to situations, how they can get a handle on that, and how they can gradually figure out what the best solutions are. But it's a collaborative process for me working with my clients, and whether it's individuals or teams. And essentially, my goal is to help them find the answers that work best for them.
That's interesting, Mark. If I may observe for a moment, like something you said, so I don't lose the thought. It's like the fact that I heard you in the last part of your response there, talking about the solution, right? And I remember when we started the show, you mentioned that your very much solution oriented and how do we overcome obstacles. So I think it was good to hear, but it's also, I think, equally important to name and identify the problem, right? Because until we do that, we can't find the solution. So really good to hear is like how, to the question of how the pandemic is affecting emotional intelligence. And I think everyone at home can relate, whether you're in your private life or in your work life. I think whether you're an employee or maybe you're a manager, maybe you own your own business, you have employees, and maybe you're more short with them, more prone to irritability, frustration. You've got this kind of constant exhaustion, stress, maybe fear, anxiety. And what also strikes me is like the 1-2 punch of this pandemic, in that some places are still in person. So if you work at a grocery store, a restaurant, you're there in person, unless you're the bookkeeper, perhaps. But for those like that are going hybrid or fully remote, what I'm wondering is like, if the managers and bosses are prone to, let's say, more anger, irritability from just the constant stress of COVID-19 and the cortisol, all the different hormones and cortisol, et cetera, the chemicals in your brain, it's even harder to, that makes it harder to emotionally regulate, I imagine. But I think it's like also harder to maybe practice as much social awareness and empathy when someone is just on a conference call, they're a voice, or they're on Zoom and they're just like, a lip on the screen. You might not be able to see or sense maybe how uncomfortable they might be with the situation. So I've seen more cases of virtual workplace harassment starting. And like a lot of employers, even when the pandemic started, a couple maybe looking for the silver lining, naively joked that, well, at least we can like save money on anti-harassment training because no one's in the office. But yet harassment incidents have risen, a lot of statistics shown, because people take liberties on Zoom they wouldn't normally, and they can't see and gauge someone's uncomfortability. So I think it's like a really good point that you make. And then that whole solution of, how do we look at this? Like, how do we say, have employers and people step back and really, rein in those reactive responses? Just interesting. Yeah.
Great observations, Eric. And I know that your practice mostly focuses on employers
Right.
as your clients, but
Yeah.
the other side of the equation is also so important for people in those positions to try their best to keep in mind that for all the stress they're feeling, and there's tremendous stress on business owners about getting through the pandemic, financial concerns, managing their staff, dealing with people leaving the organization and having a shortage of staff and having to hire people, etc. There's tremendous stress, but there's a lot of stress on the other side of that interpersonal connection as well.
Right.
Employees are feeling stressed as well, and
Yes.
so it is kind of that reactive situation that you mentioned before, that if one person is irritable and hyper reactive in a negative kind of way, in a sabotorial kind of way that kind of expresses negative emotions, the other person is going to get triggered and is going to respond to it, and then it tends to escalate. So one of the things that I would recommend, because I know that employers and business owners and managers at whatever level are feeling a tremendous amount of stress. How do they relieve that stress? How do they find ways of releasing some of that pressure? And just techniques that each person has in terms of ways that they relax when they're not at work or even when they're at work.
Oh, Mark, sorry. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you there. Pardon me, but I realize we're a little over the
Hey, I'm
time of
sorry.
commercial break.
Yeah.
But I know that's okay. It's I didn't mean to interrupt you. But what I love to, like, maybe we come back from the break. I'd love to hear some of those techniques and maybe how you differentiate yourself from other coaches when you work with business leaders. So that gives our audience a little suspense. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. It's a short commercial break and an interesting topic. So
Thank
Eric
you.
Sarver, host of Employment Law Today. My guest, Dr. Marc Miller. Marc Miller Coaching and Consulting. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the Mind Behind Leadership, where we focus on what leadership really means to us and to others. We have practical discussions with the CEOs of some of the world's largest companies, owners of small businesses, and experts in psychology and behavior to get that inside track, what to do, what to avoid, and what really happens. Join me, Graham Dobbin, at the new time, 4 p.m. every Tuesday for the Mind Behind Leadership, here live on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble!
On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law and business law attorney representing management and business owners. And my guest tonight is Dr. Marc Miller, who works with companies, executives, professionals in a different capacity through coaching and consulting. And we're talking about this topic of emotionally intelligent employers leading with awareness. So really great topic. And just want to say before I get to the next question, Marc, I think you've really given us interesting both theory and practical applications as well. So I think it's helpful for those at home who might themselves be middle management employees or even entry-level employees or employers. Like you said, it applies to both sides of the equation. So I wanted to make that point there as well. Yeah. And I have actually one question for you about, I think before the break, you were perhaps mentioning what kind of maybe an exercise or a tool that business owners or employers or people can use when they're triggered, or how do they keep and then how do you work with your clients in a distinctive way?
Yeah, it starts with self-awareness. So the more the individual, whatever the position that individual is in, is aware of their emotions, and especially their upset emotions, their negative emotions, and getting upset, getting irritable, getting angry, getting frustrated, being aware of that before you start screaming. Screaming is never a good approach, and fear is never a great motivator. And unfortunately, there are still some leaders in organizations, so-called leaders or senior people in organizations that think, well, I'm the boss, I can do it, but it has a very negative impact on staff.
Right.
So it's never the best way to motivate. A much better way to motivate, by the way, is asking questions, being aware of, or trying to be aware of what's going on for the people who are working for you, using a coach approach, which people have to learn how to do usually, but trying to mentor and clarify what might be going on to help the employee find better solutions to whatever's troubling them. But in terms of the specific question that you're asking, the issue has to start with leading with awareness, which is kind of the subtitle of our presentation, our discussion today. It's self-awareness. So as a person in an authority position starts reflecting on how he or she is feeling, if there's a particular person on the team who rubs that person the wrong way, be aware of that. It may be that you're just incompatible and that person maybe isn't the best person to be on your team, but assuming that the person really brings some value, it's incumbent on the person in an authority in a leadership position to be aware of what is getting triggered in themselves.
Right.
And that's number one. And before it gets to the point of explosion, reflect on it identify it, and there's a whole technique that is part of this approach that's called positive intelligence, which is an approach to coaching that I've recently had some training in, and I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
So once you become aware that something's getting activated in you, that's called a saboteur. It's a negative reaction, and it's
Right.
and it comes with a negative emotion.
Mhm.
There are little techniques that are mini meditation devices that are actually very, very helpful. It can be a very simple one, like, you think of meditation in terms of breathing, focusing on your breath, and that's a very typical one. But you can if you do that for 15 seconds or 30 seconds, focus on your breath, you may get distracted, come back to your breath. That can ground you. That can actually activate a different part of your brain that isn't the angry, reactive fight or flight part of your brain. You
Right.
can do a little exercise that I think is fascinating. You rub two fingers together,
Mhm.
with an awareness as much as you can of, as if you're feeling the ridges on both fingers.
Mm.
So whether you really can feel them or not, if you're focused on that, you're focused on a bodily sensation, and you
Mhm.
do that for 15 seconds, or, it's really a very short thing, but the more you do it, the more you activate this part of the brain that allows you to shift
Mm.
to being in the moment rather than being in the emotion. And
Mhm.
that prepares you for
Yeah.
getting into what's the sage part of the brain, the smart part of the brain. It activates the prefrontal lobe and other parts of your brain where you can calm down, you can
Mhm.
think about what options you have, you can address it in a calm way.
Mhm.
Easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice
Sure.
because, the negative ways of responding have been reinforced over and over and over throughout our lifetimes.
Right.
Okay, so those pathways in our brain are activated instantaneously.
Right.
Have typical ones. There's an assessment that I recommend. It's called the Saboteur Assessment.
Interesting.
It's available on the website for Positive Intelligence, www.positiveintelligence.com, for the Saboteur Assessment. It's
Okay.
available for free. The coach who has created the system, his name is Shirzad Sharmain, brilliant guy who's integrated so many different aspects of psychology, meditation, neuroscience, and it's a great system. You need to work at it. You need help usually in developing those skills and practicing those skills. But the more you can practice recognizing what's going on emotionally for you, that is a negative aspect to it. Use one of these techniques, and this is one of many, to refocus away from the intensity of the emotion. You can then get into thinking clearly, rationally, calmly, and instead of that escalating process where you're reacting to something and then they react to your reaction and it escalates, it calms things down.
Right.
I wish it was as easy as I'm saying it. It takes practice, but there's a real value in learning how to do that.
Yes.
Tremendously valuable.
That I think is an important point as well. It's like, Mark, because it strikes me as, well, first off, the mindfulness meditation that we all hear so much about, fascinating to hear how it works on a scientific level. What also strikes me as interesting is that the phrase comes to mind, the expression I've heard somewhere, that it's simple but not easy, right? So it's like, breathing going like this, like, it's not hard. Breathing is not hard. We do it every day. Focusing on the breath when we're angry and upset. And as you pointed out, we have a history perhaps of reacting. A lot of people in power may have gotten there through, fight and aggression, and they're sort of unconsciously rewarded. They tell themselves, that's how I got to where I am. But you pointed out that there's a reward, because if we're calm and focused, we won't find ourselves like on the other end of, let's say, an employee's complaining to HR about an abusive manager, and we won't find ourselves like maybe being written up, or perhaps losing a good worker because like, we're just too hot-headed. So I really appreciate your
absolutely
sharing that that technique. We've got like 3 minutes or so to the end of the show. It goes fast when we're having fun, I say, but I think really good valuable stuff there. This is the usual point in the show, Mark, where I turn 2 minutes to my guest. You can talk about anything you have going on, your contact info, any workshops, or how we can reach you. The floor is yours.
Okay. I I wish I could just put it up on the screen, but I can't. So if anybody would like to follow up, I'd be delighted to hear from you. So my email address is Marc, M-A-R-C, at marcmillercoaching.com. Okay. I've been using my cell phone, not my office phone recently, and that's fine. I'm going to give you my number. If you'd like to call, 516-835-5977, 516-835-5977. And if you're interested in doing that assessment that I mentioned, the saboteur assessment, it's not mine. It's Coach Shirzad's a gift in a way to the world, which I think is very, very generous of him. Positive Intelligence has a lot of programs. He has offered and has given this gift of this program of training to, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of coaches pro bono, just because he believes in helping the world and saving the world by instituting, and I'm not proselytizing for him, but I believe that he's really done a great job of integrating a lot of things. So if you're interested, go to the website, check out the saboteur assessment. You'll find it on the homepage, and then you'll get to another page where you click on it. It takes about 10 minutes. It's free. There's no charge. But if you ever want to follow up with me in debriefing it and seeing what you can learn from it, I offer that to people, pro bono, just as an introduction to the process. And of course, if you want to work with me and develop those skills more and other things that I offer, that would be great. One thing that we didn't really clarify that I just wanted to spend a moment on, if I still have it,
like
is,
10 seconds, yeah.
okay, real quick. What differentiates me from a lot of other coaches, a lot of other business coaches or organizational coaches? And I think what really differentiates me, and I'm not unique in this, but there is a relatively small number of people who are coaching, who come from the psychology background, the psychotherapy background, who have the, that background and knowledge that's integrated into the way I coach. So, and it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. We all have, we all react, we all have triggers, we all have saboteurs. And that humanity is what we all have to acknowledge and not be embarrassed about or ashamed about.
Excellent, Marc. Thank you so much. We've got to stop for the night, but I'm Eric Sarver, your host. My show, Employment Law Today. Our guest tonight, Marc Miller, and the contact information, I'll put it in the links to the show. I wish everyone a great night. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy. Happy New Year. Join us next Tuesday, 5 p.m. on Talk Radio NYC. Marc, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
A pleasure as well. Thank you.